Welcome to EPG Pathshala. In this paper titled Methodology of Research in Sociology, we will discuss the module titled Observation. In sociology and anthropology, observation is one of the most widely used techniques of data collection. In this module, we will discuss the meaning of observation, the different techniques used by the researchers as part of observation, as part of their research, and the advantages and limitations of the different techniques of different types of observation are discussed in this module. All research, whether in natural sciences or social sciences, involves observation. It has been used as a scientific method in arriving at meaningful inferences on the observed, whether natural or social phenomena. However, data collection using observation method is not as simple as it appears to be. Observation of natural or social phenomena without following standardized procedures and established practices cannot be considered as valid for drawing inferences. Even if one attempts to draw, it has to stand the test of validity. To overcome the problems with the veracity of the findings of observation, researchers adopt certain procedures which have been standardized to a great extent. Hence, it may be said that observation of social phenomena becomes scientific when 1. It is pursued with stated objectives, 2. Systematically organized, 3. Recording of what was observed done in a scientific manner, 4. Embeds certain mechanisms to resist bias and uncontrolled observation. Unlike other methods, in observation, the researcher witnesses or experiences events or phenomena firsthand. The researcher relies upon his or her sense impressions in interpreting the event or phenomena. Observation enables capturing social reality as it exists. Objectivity in observation is achieved through conceptual ordering of events or phenomena guided by theoretical perspective adopted in the study. Researchers' observation differs from that of a layperson on the grounds that the former engages in the act of observation with an explicit theory or set of hypotheses. A number of sociologists have relied on observation in theory building. For example, George Simmel, Goffman, Cooley, etc. These sociologists used behavioral events as evidence to conceptualize their theories on human behavior and culture. Observation technique is applied in three different forms in data collection by social scientists. A. Participant observation, B. Non-participant observation, C. Controlled observation. Let us look at participant observation. In a sense, all social science research is a form of participant observation because we cannot study the social world without being part of it. In observation, the research situation is considered egalitarian, as the observer and the observed are inhabitants of a shared social and cultural field and capable of mutual recognition by virtue of a shared humanity, although they belong to different cultures. Social scientists define participant observation as the one in which researcher engages in activities of the persons he or she is studying. Participant observation refers to a research approach in which the major activity is characterized by a prolonged period of contact with subjects in the place in which they normally spend their time. During the encounters, data in the form of field notes are unobtrusively and systematically collected. Drawing upon the rich tradition of participant observation established by Malinowski and his followers, Srinivas summarizes participant observation as the one wherein well-trained anthropologists going to the area or people of his or her choice, spending a long enough period with them, usually 12 to 18 months, staying in conditions similar to those of the natives, being able to speak to them in their own language, winning the friendship of the people, collecting information through the use of well-known anthropological techniques such as conducting census surveys. Participant observation requires a particular approach to recording observations, which is done through field notes. For ethnographers, the field notes are crucial, so are data collected through questionnaire to a survey researcher. Participant observation is a method in which an observer takes part in the daily activities, rituals, interactions and events of the people being studied as one of the means of learning the explicit and tacit aspects of culture. Explicit culture is what we know or what we can know with ease. However, tacit aspects of culture lie outside the cognitive abilities of the researcher or, for that matter, outsiders to that culture. Malinowski emphasizes on everyday interactions and observations rather than using direct inquiries into specific behaviors. Debate on participant observation raises two important issues. One, the degree of participation, and two, observation in data collection. Participation implies emotional involvement while observation requires detachment. Let us look at the attitudes required to do participant observation. 1. The researcher has to approach the field site with an open mind and a non-judgmental attitude. 2. In the initial period, it is normal to feel awkward and unsure when participating and observing a new situation. As the researcher learns more, he or she begins to feel much more comfortable and confident. 3. Errors do occur during the course of fieldwork. Most of these can be overcome with time and patience. 4. It is important to be a careful observer. This is a skill that can be enhanced through practice. 5. It is important to be a good listener. And 6. Researchers should be open to being surprised and to learning the unexpected. Let us look at the stages of participant observation. Bernard outlines different stages of participant observation that any social scientist engaged in research encounters during the course of fieldwork. They are initial contact, shock, discovering the obvious, the break, focusing, exhaustion, and lastly, leaving. Initial contact. Many researchers enter the field with enthusiasm and excitement of observing a new culture. They are attracted to the idea of living in a new cultural setting. As Taylor and Bogdan point out, the task of the researcher is to establish or open relationships with informants. They conduct themselves in such a way that they become an unobtrusive part of the scene. During the first days of fieldwork, the observer tries to feel out the situation and learn the ropes. He or she tries to learn how to act appropriately in the setting. During the initial period, collecting data is secondary to getting to know the setting and people. Shock. Bernard cautions the researchers that along with the euphoria comes the shock of being placed in a new cultural setting. Apart from the issues of stay, food, etc., researchers also face the anxiety of collecting good data. Culture shock also comes from the feeling that people really may not be comfortable with the presence of a stranger in their midst. They may generate the feeling of loneliness and the urge to speak to someone. However, quite contrary to this is the problem of lack of privacy. After the initial few days of settling in the field site, the researcher may face the constant visits of informants, or gaze of neighbors, or inquiries from others. All these add to the loss of personal time. In some cultures, it may be so that there is no concept of privacy at all. Such situations place the researcher in the midst of persons all the time. Bernard, quoting Emmett Srinivas on the issue of privacy during research, "I was never left alone. I had to fight hard even to get 2 or 3 hours absolutely to myself in a week or two. I suffered from social claustrophobia as long as I was in the village, and sometimes the feeling became so intense that I just had to get out." Quote ends. A good way to overcome such problems is to engage in task-oriented work like making maps, taking censuses, doing household inventories, collecting genealogies, and so on. Discovering the obvious. Once the cultural shock fades away, researchers settle down to a systematic data collection. When the informants let the researcher into the finer aspects of culture, the obvious aspects of such culture may be unraveled. For example, Bernard talks about the discovery that women have more power in the community than meets the eye, or method of dispute resolution which operates the formal laws through informal mechanisms. Such discoveries raise enthusiasm among researchers to collect more data, to accept every invitation by every informant to every event, to fill the days with observation and to fill the nights with writing up field notes. The break. It comes after 3 or 4 months of fieldwork. Bernard says it is an important part of observation. He suggests that break provides an opportunity for the researcher to get some distance from the field site. The distance, both physical and emotional, from the informants, people and culture helps the researcher to evolve a perspective. It enables the researcher to reflect upon the field site, data collection, and the objectives of the research. During this time, researchers get opportunity to share their initial experiences and findings with colleagues, collect additional information on the field site from other secondary sources. The break thus enables the researcher to introspect and develop objectivity in research. On return to the field site, most of the researchers are welcomed by their hosts, informants, and people. This is because people in the field site believe the genuine interest of the researcher. Focusing. As the break gives an opportunity to fine-tune the process of data collection, researcher generally becomes more focused on research problem, objectives, sources of data, and the gaps in the existing data. Although researcher enters the field site with a design, more often it undergoes changes owing to the emerging contingencies in the field. The process of modifications in the research design and justifications for such would be done at this stage of research. Then next comes the stage of exhaustion, second break, and frantic activity. Once the researcher begins to feel that the data collection is exhausted, it becomes necessary to take a second break. Bernard observes that sometimes researcher may mistakenly call off data collection thinking that the informants offer no more additional information. At this stage, a short break gives the researcher time to critically look at the data and objectives of research. This enables the researcher to take stock of the situation, available time, and focus on priorities. Any gaps in the data or missing links may be identified by being out of the field site for a while and plug the gaps by visiting the field site again. This stage of participant observation involves frantic activity to collect data at a greater speed as the time left for fieldwork is less. Leaving the field. Participant observation is an intensely intimate and personal experience. Informants, neighbors, hosts may become close friends with whom the researcher might have spent relatively longer time. The researcher must be careful to letting them know the plans to leave the field site and prepare them in advance. Words of appreciation and recognition of their help in the culturally appropriate manner is of great importance in participant observation. Further, Taylor and Bogdan describe certain key aspects of participant observation. A. Negotiating the role of researcher. Negotiation of the different aspects of fieldwork like what, when, and whom to observe takes place continuously throughout the data collection process. Sometimes informants attempt to hijack the course of data collection by trying to impose their will on the researcher. Researcher, in trying to be good with the informants, sometimes may be influenced by some informants. You should try to resist attempts of informants to control your research. The next problem is with the timings for accessing certain research situations. Some places are visited at appropriate times. This may be more evident in certain organizations. Otherwise, established practices in certain institutions make it difficult to access informants at odd hours. For example, women informants may be willing to spare some time to discuss or share issues of research interests with the researcher during the mid-noon as they complete their daily course by that time. As researcher gains acceptance, she or he may exercise the power to select the places and times of observation. Establishing rapport. It is critical in participant observation. It means to be developing a feeling of empathy and having their acceptance. Researchers' presence should be comfortable to the people. Researchers should learn skill of understanding informants' non-verbal communication, their language, and perspectives. Some guidelines for establishing rapport are A. Paying homage to their routines. B. Connecting with informants by highlighting commonalities between the courses of researcher and the field site. C. Helping people in the field site in their daily course or at the time of need. D. By being polite and humble. E. Paying attention and acting, showing interest in what people say. The next important thing is participation. The extent of participation in people's activities is to be decided by the researcher. It is contingent upon the cultural aspects of people being studied. Active participation in some cultural settings may be acceptable while it becomes problematic in other settings. The guidelines suggested for active participation are A. Where involvement places the researcher in a competitive situation with informants, it is better to withdraw. B. Researchers should avoid acting and talking in ways that don't fit. For example, dressing appropriately, talking or laughing loudly, etc. C. Any participation that interferes with the researcher's ability to collect data should be avoided. D. Avoid over-identification or going native. Abandoning the role of researcher and over-participation poses problems for the researcher. Key informants. Key informants are the primary source of information and access to the field site for the researcher. In the early phase of participant observation, the researcher looks for those who accept him or her more rapidly, spend time and guide. However, a word of caution is that the researcher should try to hold back from developing close relationships until one has developed a good feel for the setting. It is also unwise to depend too much on some or few, leaving others for information. Field tactics. Moving beyond some key informants who provide information in the initial phase of research, the researcher tries to broaden the horizon of information sources. The tactics to be adopted while collecting data at this stage of research are: A. By acting naive, yet as an interested outsider, the researcher can gain greater access to information. B. It is important to be present at the right place at the right time to collect data. C. It is advisable for the researcher not to allow the informants to know too much of what exactly is needed for research. This is because the informants might hide information or stage events for the benefit of the researcher. D. Once the researcher gains confidence and understanding, he or she may use aggressive tactics in data collection. Use of obtrusive research technique at this stage may not pose problems for the researcher. Asking questions. It is appropriate to ask questions in such a way as to enable the respondents to talk about it without inhibitions. Thus, questions posed by the researcher should be sympathetic to the perspectives of the respondents of the situation. Questions should not be intimidating, prejudicial, and presupposed. Informants must be encouraged to talk more. Listening becomes an important asset for the researcher. Field notes. In participant observation, field notes are of great importance. Field notes are the source of raw data. Data in participant observation is generated by writing field notes. Use of audio and video recording devices is more common while capturing what the respondents say during a formal interaction. Events can also be recorded using audio, video, and audio-visual recording devices. The use of these devices helps the researcher to analyze words, behaviors of the actors involved at a later point of time. However, the importance of writing field notes is immense. Researcher can write notes recording the observation of day-to-day events and behavior, conversations, and casual interviews, which are the key sources of data in participant observation. A caution on field notes is that they should be written as soon as possible, as memory is more fleeting and untrustworthy. Some of the other hints for the researchers on field notes are: 1. Pay attention to the observation setting. 2. Shift focus from a wide angle to a narrow angle. 3. Look for keywords in people's remarks. 4. Concentrate on the first and last remarks in each conversation. 5. Play back remarks and scenes in your mind. 6. Leave the setting as soon as you have observed as much as you remember. 7. Record your field notes as soon as possible after observing. 8. Draw a diagram of the setting and trace your movements through it. 9. Once you have drawn a diagram and traced your own movements, outline specific events and conversations that occurred at each point in time before you record your field notes. 10. If there is any time lag between observing and recording the field notes, tape record a summary of outline of the observation. 11. Pick up pieces of lost data after you have recorded your field notes. About the form of field notes, some of the suggestions are: 1. Start each set of notes with a title page. 2. Include the diagram of the setting at the beginning of the notes. 3. Leave margins wide enough for your and others' comments. 4. Form new paragraphs often. 5. Use quotation marks to record remarks as often as possible. 6. Use pseudonyms for the names of people and places. 7. Make at least 3 copies of your notes. Triangulation. In participant observation, data collected through one method is verified through other methods. Instead of relying on single source, researchers are encouraged to collect data on same aspects from multiple sources. This checks the researchers as well as informants bias. Also, the multiple sources of data provide deeper insights into the setting. Historical and public documents, official reports, memos, correspondence, contracts, salary schedules, files, evaluation forms, and diaries provide important information. Sometimes these sources may help guiding the researcher in observation, interviews, and interactions with informants and people. Importance of participant observation. Participant observation enhances the quality of data collected and interpretation of data. This is possible through tacit understanding of people's behavior and field situation. Everyday life and activities of people studied is known to the researcher through tacit understanding. As the researcher spends considerable amount of time with people being studied, knowledge about them is acquired through interpretation of their actions. Thus, data is available in the embodied form and is not there to collect directly. Participant observation allows the researcher to understand and interpret non-verbal communication. Advantages of participant observation. Participant observation is a long duration study. The period of stay of the researcher in the field site is relatively long. Such a long association with the members of the group or society studied may help the researcher to bring out the key features of the community or group which otherwise is not possible with any other method of research. Rich insights into the process, actions, and events help the researcher drawing valid conclusions. As the findings of the study are based on a first-hand account, participant observation's validity is more when compared to other methods like survey or formal interview. Limitations of participant observation. The most difficult part of non-participant observation method is that the researcher has limited control over the happenings in the field. It is difficult to fit the external social reality into a systematic form to draw conclusions. Participant observation suffers from the spread and size of units studied. It is conducted in a relatively small area and from a relatively small number of respondents. Observation of large groups or collectives spread over a vast area is difficult. During participant observation, the researchers often get so involved that they tend to lose objectivity in their observation. A participant observer may become non-observing participant. Like other methods of intense research on small groups, findings of participant observation are less amenable for generalizations. Personal factors of the researcher becomes critical in participant observation. Factors like age, sex, race, ethnic background, presentation of self may influence the process of observation. Sufficient understanding of cultural aspects of the group or community studied on the part of the researcher may be essential for a good observation. Then we'll quickly look at non-participant observation. As opposed to participant observation, in non-participant observation, the researcher doesn't try to become a part of the social group or community to be studied. The researcher remains outside the cultural ambit of the social group or community and yet performs the role of an observer, similar to that of the researcher in participant observation. Even the members of the community being studied would be aware of the status of the researcher. There is no ambiguity on the part of both the parties of observation, that is the researcher and the people studied, about the status of the researcher vis-a-vis the research is concerned. Non-participant observation is thus called as quasi-participant observation. The researcher in non-participant observation research settings remain an outsider throughout the study period. This position of the researcher allows him or her to be objective in recording observations. It is also possible that the members of the group being studied feel free in the company of the researcher who is an outsider. However, this technique offers limited scope to understand the research situations. Insightful socio-cultural accounts of events, actions of the members of the group or community will remain elusive with non-participant method. Controlled observation. In this type of observation, effort is directed at maintaining the influence of researcher in recording the observations. It is a widely held notion that social scientists, how much ever they try to restrain from imposing their values, ideas, beliefs in observation, fail to capture social reality objectively. Hence, there have been attempts at isolating the effects of the researcher's social background upon his or her observations on the social group under study. Usage of carefully drawn schedules and advanced equipment in recording an event or action by camera, tape recorder, maps, photographs, sociometric scales, etc., may enhance objectivity in observation. However, speaking in a stricter sense, a sociologist using controlled observation methods and precision tools is no different from a zoologist or a botanist attempting to study the natural habitat. Hence, it is difficult to conduct controlled observation in social research. However, to a great extent, systematic observation limits the bias of the researcher. Ethics in observation. Social scientists are often accused of having a predatory relationship with their objects of study, especially where these objects are relatively powerless. Thus, observation method raises many ethical questions. Particularly, participant observation is a much debated method among all social science research methods. This is because of the fact that researcher lives with the people being studied for a relatively longer period of time, participates in their day-to-day activities, observes them from close quarters, gain access to the intimate aspects of social cultural life of people. At the same time, he or she has the task of recording the observed events, phenomena, activities in a faithful manner. Bernard suggests that what could clearly be considered as gossip during informal conversation can become data for the researcher. Such kind of issues becomes part of the ethical concerns of the social science research. It is often questioned that whether the researcher informs the people he or she interacts with for data collection about the usage of such information. To quote Bernard, field workers rarely recite their informed consent script during afternoon conversations carried out while swinging in hammocks. There are ethical questions regarding the publication of information collected through field notes. Related to this is the preservation of anonymity of participants identified in field notes. It is suggested that with computerization, maintenance of anonymity becomes easier than otherwise. Another ethical concern about participant observation is the extent of attachment developed by the researcher with the respondents or informants during fieldwork. It is reported by many anthropologists who use ethnography that they have entered into fictive kinship relations in order to gain access and confidence of people being studied in a community or group. It may be said that most often such relationships enabled efficient data collection, albeit at the cost of the researcher's personal time and energy. So far, in this module, we have looked at the technique called observation in detail. As we know, observation is widely used technique of data collection by sociologists and anthropologists, and in this module we have learnt about the different techniques of observation and how to collect data using this observation method. It is a challenging task for the sociologists and anthropologists to arrive at scientifically valid, meaningful data using observation technique. We have looked at the process of arriving at scientifically valid data using observation method. Thank you.